Hey neighbor, welcome back to ARTV. My name is John, and it's time to introduce a new series that I'm gonna call Tears on Tuesday because we're doing tier lists, and it's TAUNT for short. We love acronyms almost as much as we love puns and music on this channel. Music is of course subjective, so as I twiddle my tiny mustache, I throw myself at the mercy of the courts, saying these are just my viewpoints on what is generally considered the worst, even if I don't consider them to be the band's worst album. The three main rules for this list are no cover albums, no solo artists, and no debut albums, because I feel like that's the low-hanging fruit. The worst album from a great band might still be something that's worthwhile, and I wanted to open the list by proving that. It's The King of Limbs by Radiohead. This is widely considered to be their most controversial album since their debut, and I think a lot of fans were underwhelmed by it. This one just kind of gets lost in translation. There's some great songs on here, don't get me wrong. I love tracks from Bloom to Lotus Flower, but it is a little bit uneven. So I'm starting off with something in the C tier. It's by no means bad, but I definitely think they could do a lot better. Talking about My Sharona, it's Gary Cherone leading Van Halen for the 1998 album Van Halen 3. This had disaster written all over it because Eddie Van Halen, he was dealing a lot with his addictions, and of course the spotlight was on the fact that they had yet another new singer after Sammy Hagar. This album is a mess. It doesn't really work out. There's a couple of okay songs, but Eddie just belting out a ballad to close the record. There's a lot of miscues here, and I'm gonna have to put Van Halen down in the D. Come Down Machine by The Strokes is definitely a divisive album. That alongside Angles made up their early 2010s material. They came out back to back, and The Strokes themselves expressed disinterest in the album Angles. They said the recording process was a mess, and I guess Come Down Machine was around the same time, so I doubt it was that much better. I like this album personally. It has grown on me. There's some fantastic tracks from Partners in Crime to Chances. I'm actually gonna put this one up in the B tier. Zeitgeist by the Smashing Pumpkins was the first reunion album, although I don't know how much you could really call it a full-on reunion. Billy Corgan is certainly a persistent motherfucker. In this album, it delivers a few punches. You can feel that he really was trying to bring back some peak Pumpkins era ideas, but it just didn't pan out. It's a boring slog mostly to get through. I'm putting it down in the D. This next one is probably gonna piss some of y'all off, but it could make a few others cheer in excitement to see it appearing. Blink-182 don't have an album that I would call a full-on disaster, but California was probably the closest they came. I think that Blink were trying to go back to their roots, have some fun, but it felt a little bit forced in the way they did it. There's a lot of catchy songs on here. Left Alone with Matt Skiba proved that he could work in the band, and I definitely have some nostalgia for it. I'm gonna put it in the C tier. After nearly a decade without an album, No Doubt finally returned in 2012 with Push and Shove. This is a messy album, but it's one that I actually like quite a bit. It's definitely not up to par with some of their other records, even their 2003 effort Rocksteady that had preceded this. I think that a lot of Gwen's solo efforts had kind of clouded her mind in terms of what collaboration meant. And this album, while it does have its strengths, it's certainly very mid, so another C tier placement feels fitting. Legendary supergroup Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young put out their album American Dream in the late 80s, and the results were tepid at best. This is a very dull album, and despite the fact that it has a lot of their awesome vocal harmonies, the things that you would expect from Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, this album was actually made because of a promise from Neil Young, where he said, hey, I'll come back to the band if you guys get your shit together, essentially, and stop drinking, deal with the problems. They did that, he came back, and the album is just kind of a snooze fest. There's some good songs, but another C tier. This one still hurts to talk about because it's my favorite band, okay? Green Day put out Father of All Motherfuckers in very early 2020, just before the pandemic consumed the entire world, and people forgot about it. Just as soon as the first wave spiked in the US, Green Day, Father of All, and the whole tour that was meant to support it, who cares? Drop it out the window, and I don't blame them. They don't play songs live, they've almost completely forgotten about it, and the entire rumor behind it is that they did it to get out of a recording contract. I don't know if that's true, but I just don't come back to these songs. They feel commercially motivated, watered down, they definitely aren't the band that we know and love, and there are some interesting ideas. I will defend places of the album, but overall, I don't come back to it. D tier. MGMT are such a fascinating duo to watch work because they evolve, ebb and flow, the sound is ever changing, yet you generally know what to expect from MGMT, and that is a lot of weirdness. They really dialed it up on their 2013 self-titled album, and this is the only album of theirs that I don't really like all that much. It suffers from pacing issues, from some of the tracks dragging on too long, and some of the weirder ideas. It just feels like they kind of let themselves wander, and it feels a bit too open as a result of that. So I don't think it's awful, I'm just very cool on it. So C for cool. Oof, this next one is definitely a little bit of a testy subject still, because Joe Strummer, R.I.P., this is a very bad album. It's so disintegrated and detached from the rest of what The Clash did. Of course, the other band members were pretty much gone by this point. I don't think anybody else other than Joe contributed, and the producers were tearing this album apart. It's a big old fat fucking F. Oh, sorry. Oh, thank God. Bus drove by outside, or else I might have forgotten to wake up and talk about Around the Sun that came out in 2004. It's an REM record that I find to be incredibly, insufferably tedious, like so boring. And some people will say, well, if you look at the lyrics, if you look at the writing, you know what? No, the band themselves have distanced themselves and said, yeah, this was not our best work. I think it's sleepy time tea, and that's putting it nicely. I'm just gonna go ahead and throw this in the D tier. U2 making any sort of appearance is sure to stir up some controversy because a lot of people seem to have this notion of what they think is the worst U2 album, whether it be Songs of Innocence because of the iTunes stunt, or maybe October because of its rushed recording process. I decided to go with 1997's Pop, which definitely divided fans and critics. This is an album that I actually think was kind of a cool gamble. It has that initial flow to it that really just doesn't let the music stop. There's a lot of urgency to it, and I think that the lyrics and some of the production can be very cheesy, especially in the back half, but it's not as bad as everybody says it is, at least certain corners of the internet. I'm just gonna go ahead and be nice and put it up there in the C. Bringing up One Hot Minute by the Red Hot Chili Peppers in conversation feels like talking about somebody's intimate private life, and it's like, oh my god, I can't believe that you brought that up, Jim. Yes, it happened. Yes, it exists, with Dave Navarro playing guitar, and I actually think it's a pretty damn good album and one of the best that we're gonna talk about in this video. When you get to tracks like Walkabout and My Friends, I feel like there's a lot of connectivity, a lot of energy behind it that can feel just very radiant, very chill and effervescent. I like what this album does, I like how funky it is, I like Dave's riffs. It's an album that doesn't get enough love, and yeah, bitches, it's going A tier. This next one I debated even including in the first place because I know it's not a proper album. In fact, Tyler Joseph from 21 Pilots has called it a glorified mixtape, which is something that I would have to agree with, but I wanted to talk about regional at best. This comes from a duo that was just introducing Josh Dun, the other half of the puzzle, to the world. He was drumming, Tyler Joseph was rapping, and obviously singing as well. And a lot of their Tumblr core era that was adjacent to like Vessel and this, the worst parts of it live on regional at best, whether it be the production, some of the songs. There are some great ones that I really admire, like Ruby and even Kitchen Sink, but overall, the album is not really for me. I'm gonna put it in the C. If you want to make someone's head explode in the indie world, then just tell them that Strangers to Ourselves is the best Modest Mouse album. It's not, okay? I readily admit that. I don't think it's anything close to fantastic, but good lord, people were going in on this like the band had just turned into Imagine Dragons. Maybe that is what it felt like to people who have shrines of Modest Mouse albums like Good News and The Moon in Antarctica built to Modest Mouse in their room, but it's really not all that bad. I still love and come back to the single Lampshades on Fire and The Ground Walks with Time in a Box. There's some great tracks on here, and I do think that it definitely gets drowsy, it's too long. I think I guess C tier is probably where I'm landing on this one too. I've been a fan of the main since I was an active MySpace user, so that should give you an idea on time frames here. I go way back, and it was definitely an embarrassment I felt like when XOXO from Love and Anxiety in Real Time dropped in the summer of 2021. Weak productions, nauseating lyrics in places on tracks like High Forever, it's just a bit of an awkward placement. So for me, I guess I'm gonna have to cram in XOXO somewhere in the D tier. The Titanic-sized Oasis album Be Here Now is appearing, I think, due to the sheer magnitude of the controversy and press that surrounded it back in the late 90s. It was the death of Britpop. This album is blamed for that quite frequently, and while it's bloated in definitely dead weight in places, I don't think that this album is without its star players. There's some great tracks that might run on a little bit too long, and Noel Gallagher admits being zonked out of his mind while recording and not really having the best idea process and structure within the band. Obviously, if you know anything about Oasis, that doesn't seem abnormal, and I think I'll put this one in the C tier. Some of y'all might take issue with me calling Incubus a great band, but I really do think they are. If you look back to Science, Morning View, A Crow Left with a Murder, they really did try to do new things within the space of nu metal, alternative, and they continued to evolve even all the way up through Light Grenades. It's definitely been messy since then, but if not now, when is probably the most boring of them all. This album does nothing for me. I'm putting it down in the D. Hot Space by Queen crept out of the early 80s and did present us with an incredible collaboration, probably one of Queen's best songs ever in Under Pressure with David Bowie, but it also provided us with a lot of their most excess, a lot of the filler, and for that reason, a lot of people never come back to it, and I think it deserves a spot in the D tier. Simulation Theory is polarizing all over the place, it's frustrating, it is positive at times, but there's so many moments where I just want to jump through the screen and say to Matt Bellamy, like, you have to be a self-aware parody at this point, right? Led Zeppelin's 1976 album Presence has also stirred up a lot of debate because some people see it as a straightforward, refreshing piece from the band. Robert Plant was going through a lot at the time. He was recovering from a massive injury, and they stripped out the keyboards. They took away a lot of the excess. And for that reason, I do like this album. It really does get right to it. It's a little overly long, some of the tracks feel overcooked, but I don't think it's bad. I'm actually gonna put this one up in the B. It hurts a little bit every time I remember that One More Light is always going to be the final album that Linkin Park made with Chester Bennington, and it could be the final Linkin Park album ever. I personally really love the song Halfway Right and its confessional nature. Of course, the title track is incredibly emotional, and Talking to Myself is a good little anthemic blast that definitely gets the blood pumping. I don't think this album is irredeemable, but it's definitely their worst, and for that reason, keeping in mind with the rest of their catalog, D tier. Some of y'all Korn fans out there make it feel like anytime you mention the 2007 Untitled album, it's like somebody launched a giant fart during a moment of silent prayer at a funeral. Korn are a nu metal band that really did start to lose their identity around the mid-2000s, and as somebody who was introduced to them with the album that preceded this, See You on the Other Side, I didn't know how to feel when this record came out, because Evolution still goes pretty hard as a single, and I do like some of the deep cuts more than I feel that I'm supposed to. In fact, I feel that Korn 3 Remember Who You Are after this, I feel that that's the worst Korn album, and this one, I think I'm gonna have to put in the C tier, because it's a little bit slept on. Underpromoted, underconsumed, and perhaps underrated, Screaming Bloody Murder by Sum 41 came out in 2011 to very negative reviews, which really did surprise me, considering I don't think it's all that offensive at all. In fact, a lot of it is quite good, including a certain trilogy that lives here. The title track, Screaming Bloody Murder, Unleashed, and I still think it's a fantastic Sum 41 track, one of their best. And while, of course, they're missing a very prominent figure in the band, I think they worked exactly what they wanted to on this album, and I'm gonna put it in the C tier as well. Honestly, just looking at my C tier row right now, I feel like I want to bump up the King of Limbs because we started there. I'm just gonna go ahead and move that up to the B because looking at the C tier row, it feels like one thing really doesn't belong. It ain't easy being Wheezy, and as any fan of Weezer that lived through this Ratitude era would tell you, Oh god, hold on to your fucking seat. Weezer were facing a myriad of issues after the release of their much more commercial-friendly album Make Believe in 2005, and after that, putting out an album like Gratitude only sealed the casket for many fans. I don't think this album is great, but there are some moments that I think are either ironically or unironically good, like If You're Wondering If I Want You To, and Can't Stop Partying with Lil Wayne. I'm still gonna have to put it in the D tier, but there is stuff worth hearing. We don't need to spend much time here because you've seen Saint Anger by Metallica on probably every list of bad albums by great bands that you have ever seen in your life. So the Arthur Angry Fist meme of an album cover that features so much snare from Lars Ulrich that you could swallow it like a whale, this album is F tier for me. I can barely make it through it. I don't ever want to hear it again. Let It Be by the Beatles has a bad reputation even to the band itself because of the climate that it was recorded in. It feels a bit rushed, and it definitely is disjointed. It came out as their final album, even though it wasn't the last one to be recorded, so while there are some legendary tracks on here, The Long and Winding Road, I Am Looking at You, this one is C tier. It's definitely not top of the line for the Beatles. This next one feels like the angel Lucifer just plummeting towards the earth, because while the 1975 were on a major stride from the early to mid to even the late 2010s, they went into 2020 with an absolute fury, and by fury, I mean an album that is exhausting in every way to analyze. It's a record that is very pretentious, very overly long. This is almost an hour and a half of material, and most of it is not worth hearing. It's an experiment that failed, and it's F tier. Brendan Urie took Panic at the Disco into their official solo era with Pray for the Wicked, a Broadway-themed album that definitely misses the mark if you spend any time at all thinking about the lyrics, the really noisy, cluttered production that's very obnoxious and washed out, and the lack of personality that makes this album just a slog and a bit of a cringe to get through. It's easily the worst Panic album, and it definitely is going down in the D. Human After All by Daft Punk is the final of the 30 albums that we've covered in this video, and for me personally, this is going a touch above up to the B tier just because it's grown on me. Human After All has such weird sequencing, and the production style is very different from what you would expect from the Robots, but the fact that they were able to pull off some of the sampling and tether it to real-life instrumentation and making things a bit less synthetic, I suppose my helmet's off to them, and I think B tier is definitely fair. Hey, thank you so much for watching to the end of this video. If you're actually still here, then I appreciate you for checking out Tiers on Tuesday. If there's other big tier lists that you want to see me do, then leave topic suggestions in the comments section, hit that like button, and check out some recent videos on screen. Other than that, I'll be back soon for more on ARTV.